Brian had always wanted to be one of those people who read books regularly. He saw others carrying books around, talking about what they learned, and he wanted that for himself. He had a stack of books he'd bought over the years, sitting untouched on his shelf, collecting dust. Every January, he'd make a resolution. This is the year I'll read a book every month. And every year, he'd start with enthusiasm, only to give up by February. One day, after another failed attempt, Brian stumbled across the idea of making habits obvious. It sounded simple enough, and he thought, why not give it a try? The advice was to make the desired habit more visible and easier to do. So he thought about his goal, reading more, and decided to tweak his environment to make it easier for himself. Brian had always kept his books on a high shelf in his room, neatly stacked but out of sight. He realized that if he couldn't see them, he wouldn't think about them. So he took one book, the one he'd been meaning to read for months, and placed it on his coffee table in the living room. This was the spot where he usually sat to drink his morning coffee and check his phone. Now, every morning as he sat down with his coffee, the book was right in front of him. He didn't have to search for it or remind himself about it. It was just there. The first morning, Brian saw the book and thought, okay, I'll read a page or two. He picked it up, read a couple of pages, and then put it down. No big deal. The next day, he did the same. A few pages became his new routine. Soon, he started looking forward to it, a quiet moment with his coffee and his book. But he didn't stop there. Brian decided to add another small change to reinforce his habit. He paired his new reading habit with an old one. Each time he finished making his coffee, he would immediately sit down and read a page. He called it his coffee and read time. It was a small change, but it made the habit stick. Reading was no longer something he had to remember to do. It was just part of his morning ritual. Weeks went by, and Brian noticed something surprising. He was reading more than he ever had, not just a page or two, but whole chapters. By the end of the month, he'd finished a book, then another the next month. Without realizing it, he'd become one of those people he admired, carrying a book around, ready to read whenever he had a moment. Brian's friends noticed the change and asked him how he did it. He told them about his simple trick, making his habit obvious. He explained that he didn't rely on willpower or motivation. He just made his books easy to see and easy to pick up. He made his environment work for him instead of against him. Brian's story isn't about some grand transformation. It's about a small, practical change that made a big difference over time. By making his new habit obvious, he created a simple path to achieving a goal that had once seemed too hard to reach. And in doing so, he learned that sometimes the easiest way to build a habit is just to put it right in front of you.